Good evening everyone, and welcome to our last live webcast before we do a brief summer break. Today I've prepared for you a special about moving scenery, both using DMX Control and other sources. But before we move on to this, I'd like to take a brief moment and talk a little bit about a few shows or places where you could have seen Capture recently. Starting with the Get show in Guangzhou, China, where Capture was represented by our Chinese resellers Artesian. So thank you for helping us show Capture to the Chinese market. Moving on to an open day that we co-hosted in Athens together with Omicron Pro Lighting and RGB Dry Hire. This was on the 16th of May, the International Day of Lighting. Day of Light, actually, where Capture could be seen visualizing live together with a setup of a physical setup of lights and live control at this venue in Athens in Greece. And visitors could also meet my colleague Vagelis, who was there demoing Capture. And finally, the InfoComm in Vegas just a few weeks ago, it feels like years ago, where we'd like to thank Elation Professional for representing us in Vegas to the market there. Capture was shown together with the M series product range, visualizing for the light console. So thank you very much for that. The next opportunity to see Capture will most likely be in London for the Plaza show in mid-September, or the LDI show in Vegas mid-October. And it looks as there will be Capture representatives present at both of these shows, so we would quite look forward to seeing you there. So let's talk a little bit about the topic of today, which is moving scenery. Now, please, as usual, if you have any questions during my presentation, do write them in the comments field and I will try and pick them up and answer them right away, or save them for later depending on what kind of questions they are. So give me a shout out and I'll try to answer your questions. So I have prepared a Capture project file that we're going to be using in this moving scenery walkthrough. As you can see, it is the Chateau demo project file. I've made a few simplifications and I've also enlisted two virtual actors. We have Bob on the left-hand side and Carl on the right-hand side. They're going to help us try out the moving scenery features in Capture. So the first thing we're going to do is simply have an object moved on stage. Simple as that. The way we do that is by going to the library and picking up the DMX Mover object. This is an object made to move things. So I'll drag and drop this into the design in the vicinity of our actor Bob here on the left-hand side. Now, if we zoom in a little bit on the DMX Mover, you can see it has a big dot in the center, and then it has three axes going out from this dot. These axes represent the X, Y, and Z axes that we will be moving Bob along. The exact placement of the DMX Mover is not important at this point, but I will get back to that later. Now, in order to have in order to have Bob respond to the DMX Mover, we need to associate them somehow. And the way we do this is by connecting Bob to the DMX Mover. Now, before I do that, I want to give the DMX Mover a name, because when you start adding more movers or rotators, as I will eventually, it gets a bit confusing if they don't have describing names. And I will use the unit field for this and give this DMX Mover simply the name of Bob, which will be moving our actor Bob here. So I will now select Bob and go to the motion fixture property and select DMX Mover Bob. Now what that means is that Bob is now controlled by this DMX Mover. And if I open the control pane here, which has now 3 sliders for motion in X, Y, and Z, and I move one of these sliders, you will see Bob moving. So now we can move Bob into the light and stop him from hiding in the dark corner here. And as you can see, I can move him along all the axes, so I can actually make Bob levitate here, which he doesn't like, so I'll take him back to the floor. Now at this point, Bob can only move 1 meter in each direction, and the reason for this is that this is the default settings of the DMX Mover. This can be changed, so what I will do is I will change the X range to 3 meters and the Z range to 3 meters, so he has a floor area corresponding to 9 square meters that he can be moved around in. So now when I use the sliders, you can see he's moving around in a much larger area. So this was the first basic example of simply moving an object. Now I'm going to discuss more motion control topics here before I actually hook it up to DMX. So the next thing I want to show you is more ways of working with the DMX Mover. So I'm going to add a second DMX Mover, and I'm going to connect it to our other actor over here, Carl, for a moment. So again, I'll give the mover a name. I'll give it the name of Carl so we can keep track of which is which. I'll select Carl, and now I'll show you another way of connecting Carl with our new DMX Mover. So I'll move the camera so we can see Carl over here and the mover in white next to him. I can use the drag and drop button of the navigator to drag and drop Carl onto the DMX Mover. And now you can see in the motion fixture property here, in the design tab, that indeed Carl is connected to the DMX Mover Carl. So as this list of movers can get pretty long, especially if you have, well, if you have a lot of them, it will get long. It's often easier to simply drag and drop the object onto the right mover than always trying and find the right one by name. And just as with Bob, moving the slider, if I manage to press the right location, obviously we'll be moving Carl. So that's not surprising. The next thing I want to show you is moving not just scenery, but also objects and fixtures in particular. Now before I do that, I'm actually going to remove the DMX Mover from Carl, which, as you will discover, at the moment I cannot. And the reason for that is I can't remove a mover when it's associated to objects. So I'm first going to have to detach Carl from the DMX Mover. The easiest way to do that is to select Carl, double-click on the motion fixture property and choose No. Once I've done that, I can go back to the DMX Mover and delete it. So let's take a look at moving some other objects and lights in particular. And what I want to move is the pipe I have in the back here with the 6 moving head units on, focused on Bob and Carl. So I'll take a DMX Mover from the library and I'll drag and drop it next to the pipe which has these fixtures hung on it. Now in this case, since I only want to move the fixtures up and down, I'm going to make a few adjustments. So in the selected items properties here of the new DMX Mover, which I will name Pipe, we have the X, Y, and Z ranges, but obviously I only want to move the pipe up and down, so I'm going to clear the X and Z ranges by setting them to 0. And then I will assign a Y range. Now normally the Y range will be going upwards, but I want to be moving the pipe downwards, so I'm going to assign it a range of -6. This means that the way I've drawn the pipe right now will be the default location, and giving the mover an input will actually move it down. So let's zoom out a bit here. Now I have the mover here on the left side of the stage right actually, and I'll just move it to a more reasonable position. You can see the mover here in the live view as well, here on the side of the stage. And currently the location is at 0, and by dragging the slider to the left it will go to -6. So let's hook up the pipe and all the fixtures by dragging and dropping them on the mover I just added. You can see the motion fixture is now DMX Mover Pipe. I'll select the mover, move the camera a bit, and now when I drag the slider to the left, you can see the pipe with the fixtures coming down on stage. Let's zoom in a bit. Like this. Now obviously this would now combine with any other movers in action, so I still have the mover that moves Bob around, so I could in fact move Bob back into a bit of the light again. So as you can see, it's easy to set up both scenery and lights to respond to movers, and as I will soon show you, also control them using DMX. Now before I get to that, I want to show you the other object we have for motion, which is called the DMX Rotator. As you might expect, the rotator is used to rotate scenery, or lights for that matter. But I have prepared in this project file, you can see that Carl is standing on a round podium, which obviously needs to be rotated. So I'll drag and drop the DMX Rotator into the design here. And as you can see, although it's a bit crowded here, you can see it shows up as a circle with a dot in the center. Now in this case, it is important that the center of the dot is at the center of the rotation. So if I want to rotate this podium, I will want to snap it to the center of the podium, otherwise the podium will be rotating out of center. Also, I want to be rotating both the podium and Carl, so I'll select them both and change the motion fixture to the DMX Rotator, which as you can see I haven't given a name yet, so shame on me. I'll fix that right away by naming it Podium. Now what happens when I select the rotator is I have a slider for the rotation. And by adjusting this, I'm rotating the podium with Carl on it. The rotator has a few other settings than the DMX Mover. And they are of course related to the angle of rotation. One is the range, the total number of degrees that we have control of when rotating. So if I set this to 180 degrees, I can only rotate the podium by 180 degrees. Now, as you can see, Carl is swinging from facing the audience to facing away from the audience. But by applying a value to the origin, I can offset the rotation by 90 degrees, for example, and have him swing from facing left to facing right. Now, if I were to move the DMX Rotator, just to show you what happens, you now see how the center of the rotator is important, as if it's out of place, we will be rotating and actually changing the position of the podium as well. So let's undo that. I'm also going to restore the 360 degrees without an origin offset, which means it's time to move on to the DMX control. But before we get there, we have a question whether it's possible to both move and rotate Bob, which indeed is possible. Now remember, Bob is on the left-hand side here. So let's take a DMX rotator and add it to the mix. Now, if we want to both move and rotate an object, what we need to do is choose whether we first wish to move or first wish to rotate. Now, the best way to show you the difference is probably to just show you the difference by doing it rather than trying to explain it. So, at the moment, we have Bob connected to the mover. We've added a rotator, which I will also call Bob. So, by connecting Bob to the rotator first, then selecting the rotator and connecting that to the mover, we have two layers of control. We have the rotation, which rotates Bob himself. So actually, let's place the rotator right at the center of Bob. So we can rotate Bob himself with the rotator, and then we can move him separately with the mover, and he will be rotating at the position he is. Now, if I had done it the other way around, by connecting Bob to the mover first, and then the mover to the rotator, and finally the rotator to nothing, then we've turned everything around and said that Bob will be rotating around a variable position. Now, I could try and explain which system to use when, but it probably gets complicated, so my recommendation will be try them both and see which one was the one you needed. There are some cases when if you're rotating a large stage with objects on it, you want it one way, and there are cases like this one where probably you wanted it the other way around. So I hope that answers your question, Buzz, which means I'm going to undo my way back here. There we go. And talk a little bit about the DMX control part of this. So at this point in the fixture list, we have 3 motion fixtures. We have 2 DMX movers and 1 rotator. I'm going to show you how to control these with DMX, but first there's a few choices we need to make. Let's start with the mover we have for Bob here on the left-hand side. This one currently has a DMX mode of 16-bit XYZ, which makes sense because we have the 3 axes that we are moving Bob around. Then we have the other motion fixture on the right-hand side, which is the rotator, which has a DMX mode at the moment, alpha 16-bit. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change it to the alpha and speed mode. The reason for that will soon be apparent. And finally we have the mover on the left of the stage, or stage right, for the pipe with the 6 moving heads. This one only moves the pipe up and down, so I will change this to the Y 16-bit mode, since we're only using the Y axis. Finally, finally, we also need to patch them. And in order to match the control software I've got here, I need the mover for Bob to be on Universe 4 channel 1, the DMX mover for the pipe to be on Universe 4 channel 7, and the rotator on universe for channel 9, which, if you can see this behind me, which you sort of can, you can see that we have all the 3 fixtures in the 4th DMX universe. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to my laptop here. So if we could put that in picture. I'm running LSC's Clarity software, where I have patched the fixtures correspondingly and enabled DMX output. So now on my first control channel here, as you can see, oops, sorry, my hand stops there, but as you can see in the visualization, I have DMX control over the X, Y, and Z axis of the actor. Now the second motion fixture was the pipe with the moving heads, which I'm running here. And finally we have Carl's podium, where we have the angle. And that second channel I mentioned, which is speed. So using the speed channel, I can have the rotator be rotating continuously with a given speed, as opposed to the other option where I'm simply setting a fixed angle with the angle channel. So this behaves much like the moving heads that have a continuous rotation mode, for instance, such that by using the speed channel, you can have it continuously rotating. So let's see if we have any questions. Francisco is asking if this program is like WYSIWYG, to which the answer is yes, but much better. If there are no questions on the air, I'd like to thank you for bearing with me here, and hope to see you soon again on the other side of the summer with some fresh webcasts for the autumn. So thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.